Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step into the uneasy half-light of an American dawn, where a young republic talks grandly about liberty, while millions of footsteps move under force, fear, and watchful eyes. You may wonder what morning feels like in 1810 if your life can be measured, sold, borrowed, or denied by another person. You may wonder how ordinary minutes pass when the nation is expanding so quickly that maps change faster than mercy. The air is cool, the ground is damp, and somewhere a rooster calls across a yard that does not belong to you, though your hands have shaped it. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, comment with your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights, and let your breathing slow as you enter the world of 1810, where the United States is not yet old, yet already deeply practiced in contradiction. You stand in a country that counts itself bold and new, but its habits are older than its constitution. In one place, lawmakers speak of rights with polished seriousness. In another, a child is priced beside a mule, a plough, or a stack of tobacco barrels. Very uplifting. The young nation has learned how to dress cruelty in tidy paperwork. You wake to sound first. Wooden walls creak with the night's last coolness. Someone coughs nearby. A baby fusses, then settles. The faint rustle of straw and rough cloth moves through the dark. Outside, insects are fading as birds begin their little territorial arguments in hedges and trees. The sky still grey, not yet bright enough to soften anything. Smoke from banked coals hangs low and bitter. You smell damp earth, ash, sweat that never quite leaves cloth, and the stale trace of last night's cornmeal. The morning is plain, but not empty. It carries warning in its quiet. If you are enslaved in 1810, and most black Americans in the South are, the day does not begin when you choose. Time belongs to the person who claims ownership of your labour, your movement, often your family, and in the eyes of the law, your very body. That fact shapes everything. The way you stand, the way you speak, the speed of your hands, even the direction of your gaze. Freedom is not an abstract ideal here. It is the missing thing in every ordinary act. The country around you is growing fast. New states and territories are opening to settlement. White families push westward, and enslavers carry people with them into lands seized from native nations. Roads improve a little. River traffic thickens. Markets become more connected. Cotton begins to transform the lower South with astonishing force, though tobacco, rice, wheat, indigo's fading memory, and household labour still define many lives. Expansion sounds energetic in schoolbook language. On the ground. It often means more chains, more auctions, and more distance forced between people who love one another. You might be on a large plantation, though many enslaved people in 1810 live on smaller farms with fewer than 20 captives. That detail matters. On huge estates, labour can feel like part of a machine, organised by gangs, overseers, and bells or horns. On smaller holdings, the owner may watch more closely and intrude more personally into every detail of life. Neither is gentle. One is scale, the other is intimacy. Both can bruise the soul quite efficiently. In the Chesapeake, where tobacco has long shaped the land, fields stretch in uneven patches, worn by years of planting. In the Carolina and Georgia Low Country, rice culture has built a world of muddy embankments, mosquitoes, tidal water, and exhausting engineering. In towns and port cities, black Americans may haul freight, work as cooks, laundresses, carpenters, dock workers, coachmen, or domestic servants. In the North, free black communities exist in growing numbers, yet freedom there is hemmed in by prejudice, exclusion, and the constant threat of kidnapping. The forms differ, the pressure remains. You feel that pressure in law as much as in labour. Enslaved people cannot generally testify against white people in court. They can be punished physically with little legal restraint. Their marriages are rarely protected. Their children inherit the status of the mother, which means slavery reproduces itself with cold efficiency through birth. That grim principle turns the cradle into an accounting device. Historians still argue over how often enslavers thought in openly financial terms about births versus paternalistic terms they like to advertise. But the record is clear that children increased an owner's wealth. There is another legal change hanging over 1810 like a dark curtain not fully closed. Congress banned the transatlantic slave trade beginning in 1808. On paper, that sounds like a moral turning point. In practice, slavery inside the United States remains vigorous and profitable, and illegal smuggling does not instantly vanish. More important, the domestic slave trade grows in significance. People are sold south and west in larger numbers as cotton cultivation expands. So the end of one trade route does not mean the system is shrinking. It is reorganizing itself, efficiently, greedily, and with very little shame. Morning light finally begins to show edges. You see the yard, the worn path, the fence mended 3 different ways, the tools leaning near a shed. If you live in a cabin, it may be built of logs with clay packed between gaps, or of rough boards that let in drafts. The floor may be dirt or crude planks, furnishings are sparse, a stool, a chest if anyone is fortunate, maybe a skillet, a pot, a gourd dipper. Some cabins shelter a whole family, others crowd unrelated people together. Your privacy is scarce. Silence even scarcer. Your clothing scratches. Linen in warm weather, wool or heavier cloth in colder months, often coarse and repeatedly patched. Shoes may fit badly, if you have them. Children sometimes go barefoot for much of the year. The touch of the day is already with you. Damp cuffs, splintered wood, ash on fingertips, cool air at the doorway. The ache in your shoulders from yesterday has not left. It simply waits to be layered with a new ache. Yet daily life is not made only of hardship recorded in ledgers and punishments. It also contains observation, wit, memory, and skill. You learn people's tempers. You hear which horse is lame by the rhythm of its gait. You know the smell of rain before clouds fully gather. You notice who has hidden an extra onion, who can stitch a torn sleeve neatly, who tells stories with perfect timing on a winter night. These are not small things. They're part of how a person remains a person inside a system designed to flatten human beings into labouring units. You also live amid a dense world of black knowledge that white records often barely register. Garden plots, fishing spots, herbal remedies, cooking methods, songs, naming traditions, burial customs, and beliefs carried through family lines all shape the day. Some practices draw from African origins, altered across generations in America. Others are newly formed in response to local conditions. A quirky detail from the era turns up in scattered accounts of charms, roots, and protective objects hidden in cabins or worn discreetly on the body. Some observers dismiss such practices as superstition, because of course they did. Yet these objects could hold emotional spiritual and communal meaning in lives where control over much else was stolen. Religion, too, is present, though not in one simple form. Some black Americans worship within white supervised churches. Others gather in more independent ways when they can. Biblical stories of captivity and deliverance carry obvious force. So do older rhythms of praise, call and response, and spiritual interpretation rooted in African and African American experience. Not every enslaver likes this. Many prefer obedient sermons, the kind that make hierarchy sound heavenly. Very convenient theology. Even so, belief can become a shelter of thought that ownership cannot fully seize. You stand in a nation obsessed with ranking people, White Americans in 1810 argue endlessly and often confidently about race as if prejudice were a science and domination a public service. Printed notices describe skin colour, scars, teeth, height, talents, and supposed personality traits when fugitives escape. These advertisements reduce individuals to searchable property, yet they accidentally preserve flashes of humanity. A woman skilled in spinning, a man who speaks several dialects, a teenager with a habit of smiling when nervous. Behind each line is a living person refusing total erasure. In some regions, hiring out is common. An enslaved person may be sent to work for wages collected by the owner, moving through households, workshops, docks, or construction sites. This can mean slightly different routines, more contact with wider black communities, and sometimes opportunities to exchange news. It can also mean instability, exposure to abuse from strangers, and constant surveillance. Free black people may do similar work for themselves, but even then they often carry passes, papers, or proof of status because white authorities assume black movement requires explanation. Imagine needing documentation for an ordinary walk through town. Actually, many people do not need to imagine. History likes repeats. Children absorb this world early. A little girl may be set to mind younger children, fetch water, card wool, or scare birds from crops. A boy may carry wood, tend animals, run messages, or learn to handle tools under supervision. Play exists because children are stubbornly human and will find ways to laugh with a stick, a pebble, a song, or a chase across bare ground. But the border between childhood and labour is thin. Sometimes it vanishes so quietly that no one marks the moment. Food sits at the centre of daily endurance. Cornmeal is common, made into mush, hoe cakes, or bread. Pork may appear in small amounts. Molasses, greens, beans, sweet potatoes, rice in certain regions, fish where rivers or coasts allow, and whatever can be grown or gathered may stretch the diet. Smell matters here. Boiling greens send up a grassy, iron-rich steam. Smoked meat leaves a salty heaviness in the air. Fresh bread, when there is enough meal for it, can briefly make a cabin feel like kindness lives there. Briefly. The scholarly debates around 1810 often concern how much room enslaved people had to shape their own domestic worlds. Some historians stress the crushing control of owners. Others emphasize the limited but real spaces where enslaved families built culture, negotiated tasks, and asserted dignity. The truth is not neat. Conditions varied by region, crop, owner, season, and sheer accident. What remains beyond dispute is that black Americans created community under relentless pressure. That creation was not proof that slavery was mild. It was proof that people are resourceful even when trapped. As the sun climbs, the broader contradiction of the Republic becomes harder to ignore. This is a country only a generation removed from revolution, full of speeches about tyranny, representation, and natural rights. Yet in 1810 hundreds of thousands of black Americans live enslaved, and many white citizens see no unbearable conflict in that arrangement. Some speak with sentimental pride about the nation's future, while profiting from the sale of human beings. Others dislike slavery in theory, but do little to disturb it in practice. Moral discomfort, when it appears, often has a remarkable talent for taking a seat and making itself comfortable. Still, not everyone accepts the order of things. Free black communities in northern cities organise churches, schools, aid societies, and political petitions. Enslaved people resist in countless ways, from preserving family bonds to feigning illness, slowing labour, breaking tools, learning to read secretly, and running away when any path opens. Open rebellion is rarer and terribly dangerous, but fear of it lives in the white imagination all the time. That fear shapes patrols, laws, punishments, and rumour. Power knows it is resented. It simply hopes terror will keep resentment quiet, You breathe in the warming air, the smell of mud yields to sun on wood and trampled grass. Wagon rattles somewhere beyond the trees. Voices carry. Orders begin. The day is properly underway. In 1810, to be black in America is to live inside a system that is expanding in wealth, confidence, and territorial reach, while never fully controlling the interior life of the people it exploits. That is the strange and crucial truth at dawn. A person can be constrained without being emptied, watched without being known, claimed without ever truly belonging to the claimant. So you stand in the morning light of a restless republic, feeling the rough boards, hearing the call to work, smelling smoke and wet soil, and understanding without fancy language what the age demands. It demands labour, submission, and silence. Yet beneath that demand, another reality persists. People think, remember, joke, pray, plan, love, grieve, and endure. The nation may call itself free. Your own senses tell a more exact story. The first full light of day shows you what work means in 1810 not as an idea, but as a bodily fact. It sits in the shoulders before breakfast. It lives in the palms, the knees, the lower back, and the neck. For black Americans trapped inside the expanding slave system, labour is not merely expected. It is measured, corrected, compared, and extracted with a seriousness that treats exhaustion as laziness and pain as inconvenience. The nation is growing richer by convincing itself that your weariness is a useful natural resource. You step into the yard, the field, the lane, the stable, the kitchen, or the dock, depending on where life has placed you. The air is cooler than it will be later, and for a brief moment the world almost feels kind. Dew clings to grass. The smell of wet leaves and churned soil rises gently. Then the sounds of command begin. A bell rings, a horn blows, boots strike packed ground. Someone calls names, someone else counts tools. Mourning has a procedure, and procedure is one of slavery's favourite disguises. When cruelty keeps a schedule, some people start calling it order. On plantations, labour is often divided by crop, season, age, sex, and perceived strength. In tobacco regions, you may hoe, weed, hill the plants, cut worms from the leaves, hang tobacco to cure, and sort it for market. Tobacco's demanding and fussy. It stains fingers and fills the air with a bitter green smell. In rice country, the work is wetter, heavier, and haunted by disease. You move through mud, standing water, and swarms of insects while ditches, embankments, trunks, and floodgates turn the landscape into a watery machine. The smell there is its own world, part rot, part marsh, part sun-baked vegetation, with a sweetness that quickly stops being pleasant. Wheat farming brings a different rhythm. There is ploughing, sowing, reaping with sickles or cradles, binding sheaves, threshing, and winnowing. Dust clings to the face and arms. Chaff floats into the nose and mouth. You cough, blink, and keep moving. Cotton, rising rapidly in the lower south, demands brutal repetition. Planting, chopping weeds, hoeing between rows, and picking bowls all consume the body. The cotton itself looks soft at a distance, which is little offensive, really. Up close, the dry burrs catch skin and clothing. Fingers split, hands sting. The sack drags against your shoulder and hip. The field can seem endless because the row ahead always becomes another row. Many enslaved people in 1810 do not work on giant plantations at all. They live on middling farms, small holdings, or in households where the range of tasks is even wider. One day might mean clearing brush, mending fence, hauling water, splitting rails, feeding pigs, cleaning yards, and carrying grain to a mill. Another might mean spinning, weaving, washing, ironing, sewing, child-minding, or cooking over an open hearth. The household variety is deceptive. Outsiders sometimes imagine domestic labour as lighter because it happened indoors, near polished furniture and respectable tableware. Yet kitchen heat can be punishing. Laundry work can raw the hands, and the intimacy of house service often means constant scrutiny. If you are assigned to a kitchen, your world begins with fire, ash must be cleared, coals must be coaxed awake, pots are lifted, swung, and scrubbed, bread is mixed, meat is salted, cut or turned on spits, steam fogs the face, smoke curls into the eyes, grease spits against the wrist, the smell is thick with wood smoke, onions, yeast, hot iron, and animal fat. Food can be beautiful and labour can be merciless at the same time. You prepare meals you may never fully share. Few systems summarise inequality so efficiently as one person roasting a feast while counting her own ration. Laundry is its own punishment. Water must be fetched and heated. Clothes are soaked, scrubbed, wrung, boiled, rinsed, and hauled to dry. Soap lingers on cracked fingers. Wet fabric bites into the arms with its weight. Winter makes the task numbing. Summer makes it suffocating. The same shirt that looks crisp on a white body at dinner may have cost a black woman a full day of bending, lifting, and standing over steam. The shirt receives compliments. The woman receives more work. Men and women both perform heavy labour, though owners and overseers often assign tasks according to ideas about sex that are practical when convenient and ignored when profit demands it. Men may cut timber, drive wagons, work blacksmith forges, handle livestock, or perform hard field labour in groups. Women may hoe beside men, harvest beside men, carry loads, and also cook, nurse, wash, sew, and care for children. Slavery likes categories until categories interfere with extraction. Then it suddenly discovers flexibility. Children enter the labour force early. A small child may begin by carrying drinking water, gathering chips for kindling, watching birds in the fields, rolling bandages, or minding toddlers while adults work. As children grow, tasks become more exacting. A child's life can be measured by what is newly expected of the body each year. First a pail, then a basket, then a hoe, then a full day. That creeping escalation is one of slavery's quietest cruelties. It does not always announce itself with a dramatic blow. Sometimes it simply removes softness from life bit by bit until labour feels older than memory. Urban work carries its own pace. In cities like Baltimore, Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Philadelphia, or New York, Black Americans may labour on wharves, in stables, inns, rope walks, warehouses, private homes, construction crews, and artisan shops. Dock work is especially brutal. Barrels are rolled, lifted, and stacked. Cargo must move with the tide, the market, and the ship's schedule. You smell tar, salt water, fish, rope hemp, horse manure, stale beer, and sweating men packed along a waterfront. The noise is constant. Wheels clatter over stone. Sailors shout. Crates slam. Gulls complain as if they own the harbour. In a way, they are the least arrogant creatures there. Some enslaved men gain reputations as skilled craftsmen. A carpenter, cooper, mason, or blacksmith might command higher value because skill means money. Skill does not mean freedom. It may bring better clothing, extra food, or chances to move around more independently, but it can just as easily increase an owner's control. The better you are at your trade, the more determined someone may become to profit from you. A talented blacksmith can shoe horses, repair tools, make hinges, and produce nails or wagon parts. The forge glows orange, the hammer rings, and sparks skitter like tiny stars across packed earth. It almost looks romantic until you remember that the man at the anvil may not own his own name on paper. Historians continue to debate how much leverage skilled labour gave enslaved workers in bargaining over conditions, movement, or small privileges. In some cases, records suggest meaningful negotiation over extra rations, garden time, or the chance to hire out. In other cases, skill only sharpened an owner's appetite. The evidence resists a simple verdict. What it does reveal is that enslaved people constantly assessed risk and opportunity with extraordinary care. Every task had a social map attached to it. Who watched closely? Who could be delayed? Which road led to town? Which workshop held news? Which errand gave 5 unsupervised minutes instead of 2? The pace of work also depends on management style. In some places, a gang system dominates. Workers move together under close oversight, often from first light until dusk, with each motion visible to someone ready to punish delay. In parts of the Rice Coast, a task system is more common. Each person or group is assigned a specific amount to finish in a day. Once the task is complete, some personal time may remain. Though the difficulty of the task can vary wildly and illness remains a constant threat. The distinction matters, but neither system is generous. One controls every minute directly. The other parcels out limited time after full demands are met. Slavery rarely leaves a gift where it can leave a calculation. Punishment sits nearby even when no blow falls. Work is surrounded by threat, a missed quota, broken tool, perceived insolence, late arrival, or simple bad luck can invite whipping, confinement, reduced rations, or sale. The emotional climate matters as much as the physical one. People learn to hear mood in footsteps. They read a face before a word is spoken. They note whether the overseer has been drinking, whether the mistress is irritated, whether the owner lost money, whether rain spoiled a crop. Power often descends sideways. Someone important feels displeased, so someone vulnerable pays for it. Yet labour is also where enslaved people create fleeting forms of fellowship. A whispered joke travels down a row. A song keeps a rhythm steady enough to make movement almost bearable. Shared expertise becomes a quiet language. One person knows how to angle the hoe to save the wrists. Another knows how long to soak beans so they stretch further at supper. Someone else can judge weather by wind and cloud with eerie accuracy. None of this ends exploitation. Still, practical wisdom passed hand to hand can soften the edges of a hard day. Music appears often in workspaces, though white observers recorded it selectively and badly. Songs may regulate movement, relieve boredom, veil meaning, or provide a tiny territory of emotion. A hauling chant on a dock, a field holler across distance, a call and response line in a work gang all turn breath into structure. The human voice becomes a tool, a comfort, and sometimes a message. Not every song is sad. Not every song is hopeful. Some are sly, playful, irritated, or deeply tired. That complexity matters. People forced to labour are still allowed the full weather of human feeling. Even when the system prefers them flattened into one note, there are also small acts of resistance woven directly into work. A tool may be used carefully but slowly. A harness might be adjusted twice. A pot can simmer a little longer. Seeds can be spaced with a touch of calculated imprecision. Feigned confusion sometimes protects dignity where open refusal would invite savage punishment. These acts are hard to track in the archive because people with power rarely document the intelligence of those resisting them. Still, historians find traces in complaints about laziness, clumsiness, broken implements, unexplained delays, and suspicious illnesses. Funny how often tyranny mistakes resistance for incompetence. One fringe detail from the period appears in scattered descriptions of work clothing altered for practical or symbolic reasons. People tucked small objects into seams, wore certain strings, roots, or tokens beneath garments, or marked tools in ways meaningful only to them. A handle wrapped a certain way, a stitch placed at the hem, a bead hidden near the skin. Such details could be protective, spiritual, sentimental, or simply personal. In a world where nearly everything useful could be claimed by someone else, a private sign carried unusual weight. Weather governs the texture of labour. Summer means heat that presses against the chest and turns shirts heavy with sweat before the sun reaches its height. Autumn can bring relief in the air but greater pressure to harvest quickly. Winter, in many regions, brings cold fingers, smoke trapped low in cabins, frozen ground, and the misery of wet wool. Spring turns roads to mud and makes every boot heavier. The body remembers seasons as sensations rather than calendar pages. Heat behind the knees, ice at the knuckles, mud sucking at shoes, gnats at the eyes, dust in the throat. For free black labourers, work still comes wrapped in danger, though differently. A free sailor, porter, washerwoman, barber, or carter might earn wages, rent a room, join a church, and support a family, yet face curfews, discriminatory laws, exclusion from many trades, and constant suspicion. Employers may cheat wages, officials may demand papers, kidnappers may try to seize free people and sell them south. To labour while free is better than to labour enslaved, certainly. But freedom in 1810 often travels with a defensive posture. You carry yourself knowing the world may ask for proof that you belong to yourself. By midday, the scents of morning have changed. Wet soil gives way to hot dirt. Pine warms in the sun. Sweat dries salty on the lip. Iron tools smell like dust and rust. In kitchens, vinegar and boiling meat rise with thick force. On the docks, the tide turns rank for an hour. In stables, hay sweetens the air just enough to make the manure seem almost rude in its persistence. Touch changes too. Wooden handles grow slick. Shoes rub blisters. Aprons cling. Sun burns the back of the neck. The whole day becomes physical commentary. And still the labour continues because the economy of 1810 depends on pretending this endless exertion is normal. Markets in tobacco, rice, grain, livestock, household production, shipping, and especially cotton are tied to black work at every level. Banks, merchants, insurers, shippers, and planters all benefit from the system's output. Slavery is not some regional oddity tucked behind a few grand houses. It is wired into expansion, credit, and commerce. The sweat on one person's back may travel invisibly into another person's ledger, and then into another person's elegant parlour, where someone discusses Republican virtue over tea. Charming. So you move through the workday knowing that labour in 1810 is not just toil, it is discipline, surveillance, knowledge, improvisation, endurance, and often muted defiance. It is the field row, the wash kettle, the hammer stroke, the cartwheel, the kitchen hearth, the river dock, the spinning room, and the stable floor. It is the body used as engine. It is also the body refusing in 100 quiet ways to become only an engine. By evening, what matters most is often not grand politics or distant markets, but the simple question of how a person gets through the night with enough warmth, enough food, and enough dignity to begin again tomorrow. In 1810, for black Americans living under slavery or under the fragile conditions of freedom, home is rarely secure in the way the word likes to pretend. It can be borrowed space, watched space, crowded space, rented space, or a cabin built by hands that do not legally own the land beneath it. Yet even then, people make homes. They do it stubbornly, skillfully, and with a kind of quiet brilliance that power almost never deserves. You enter a cabin at dusk and the first thing you notice is the change in air. Outside, the world may still carry the smell of fields, animals, and cooling soil. Inside, the room holds smoke, old wood, worn cloth, human breath, and the remains of cooking. It feels close, sometimes comforting, sometimes stifling. A fire, if there is enough fuel, shifts the atmosphere at once. The rough walls catch the glow. Shadows move over pegs, stools, baskets, and hanging garments. A room with very little in it can still feel full because every object has been used hard and kept longer than intended, Many enslaved families live in one-room cabins of logs or boards, usually plain and quickly built. The spaces vary by region and owner, but comfort is never the main design principle. Function comes first, and even that is often stingy. Gaps in the walls can let in wind, roofs may leak during heavy rain, floors may be dirt or rough planks, chimneys smoke badly if they exist at all. In some places, two families might share a divided structure. In others, several unrelated people sleep under one roof. Privacy depends on luck, kinship, and how thin the walls are. Beds are not really beds in the grand sense, as they may be piles of straw, corn husks, rope supports, rough bedsteads, pallets on the floor, or blankets laid over whatever can soften the boards. The touch of these materials stays with you. Straw shifts and rustles. Coarse blankets scratch the skin. A rope bed sags in the middle if it has not been tightened recently. In winter, the cold crawls in from below. In summer, heat lingers stubbornly in the walls long after the sun goes down. Sleep, when it comes, is often earned in uncomfortable places. Still, people improve what they can. A blanket is folded twice for softness. A draught is blocked with cloth, moss, paper, or clay. A broken stool is mended instead of discarded. A chest may hold the few items too precious to leave out. Some cabins have shelves for bowls, gourds, or tools. Brooms keep packed floors as clean as conditions allow. White observers sometimes described such spaces with surprise when they found neatness there, as if care could not possibly exist without wealth. It is one of history's drearier habits to confuse poverty with indifference. Food shapes the emotional centre of the household. You smell supper before you see it. Cornmeal browning on an iron surface, greens softening in a pot, pork fat lending its salt and smoke to whatever else is available, beans cooking slowly, sweet potatoes roasting in embers, fish, if someone has managed to catch it, rice in some regions, molasses, if it can be spared. Even a simple meal changes the room. Steam lifts. People lean closer. The body recognizes relief faster than the mind does. Rations on many plantations are basic and often insufficient. Cornmeal and pork appear repeatedly in records because they are cheap, filling, and easy for owners to account for. But black families do not live by ration alone. They stretch, supplement, and improvise. Garden plots can make an enormous difference where they're allowed. A small patch of collards, beans, peas, squash, onions, or sweet potatoes turn survival into something a little more self-directed. A chicken or two, a trap set quietly, fish from a creek, berries gathered in season, nuts stored away. All add variety and sometimes precious nourishment. The smell of a small garden after rain is one of the gentler facts of life. Wet leaves, loosened dirt, crushed herbs, and the green bitterness of stems broken by hand. Such places matter beyond the food they produce. A garden can be a pocket of decision in a life built around obedience. You choose where the beans go, you save seed, you watch for pests, you notice which soil stays damp longest. Not total freedom, of course, nothing so generous, but enough to remind the body and mind that care can still leave visible marks on the world. Cooking itself becomes a form of knowledge passed through family and community. How long to boil greens without losing everything. How to make cornmeal stretch. Which wild plants can be used safely. How to season a pot when seasoning is scarce. How to keep bread from burning in an uneven hearth. These things sound ordinary because they are ordinary. That is exactly why they matter. Daily competence is one of the quiet foundations of endurance. A person who can make a plain meal satisfying has performed no miracle, yet the effect can feel suspiciously close to one. A quirky detail from the era appears in descriptions of makeshift sweetness. Persimmon beer, molasses treats, roasted sweet potatoes split open at the fire, or cakes shaped from whatever grain and fat were on hand could lift the mood of a household beyond the strict nutritional value involved. One little pleasure, carefully prepared, could transform an evening. Historians do not always capture the emotional scale of such moments, but you can imagine it easily enough. A child laughs, someone licks sticky fingers. For 10 minutes, scarcity loosens its grip. Clothing lives in the same world of repair and reuse. Garments are often issued coarsely to enslaved labourers, especially for field work. Shirts of rough linen or Osnaburg, trousers and jackets of heavy wool or cheap woven cloth. Dresses made for durability rather than comfort. Shoes, when available, are stiff and often badly fitted. The fabric rubs, seams split, knees wear thin, elbows fray. But the life of a garment does not end at its first tear. It begins a second life through mending, needles, thread, scraps, patches, and practical patience turn worn clothing into usable clothing again. You can feel the difference between a hasty mend and a careful one under your fingertips. Some women become especially valued within a community for sewing skill, whether they're making, altering, or repairing. A patch may not match. A hem may show earlier stitches beneath the new ones. Yet there is dignity in visible repair. It says a person refused to let a useful thing vanish before it had truly finished serving. For children, clothing often passes through several bodies before it collapses entirely. A shirt cut down, a hem raised, a pair of shoes inherited from an older sibling or neighbour. Garments tell family stories whether anyone writes them down or not. Here is the coat that belonged to an uncle. Here is the shawl worn through 2 winters. Here is the dress let out twice because a child grew unexpectedly fast. The archive may not care about such things. Households certainly did. Free black households in northern towns and cities face different pressures, but the texture of domestic life still depends on thrift and resilience. A rented room above a shop or at the back of a narrow house may serve as kitchen, parlour, and bedroom at once. Furniture is sparse, though sometimes more varied than in plantation cabins. A table, a straw mattress, a trunk, a few chairs, crockery bought second-hand, maybe a Bible, maybe a precious printed pamphlet, maybe a framed image if money and fortune have been unusually kind. The room is still vulnerable to landlords, illness, fire, debt, and hostile neighbours. But it contains a degree of self-direction that slavery denies. Cleanliness, where possible, carries practical and emotional weight. Water must be fetched, heated, and used carefully. Floors are swept. Pots are scoured with sand or ash. Bedding is aired out. Children are washed with more determination than luxury. Hair is combed, braided, wrapped, or covered according to need, custom, and occasion. The touch of a comb through thick hair after a long day can be soothing or painful, depending on patience and tangles. Hair care is never just hair care. It is presentation, memory, beauty, discipline, and comfort gathered into one act. Scholars still disagree on how much independence enslaved households had in arranging domestic routines from place to place. Some records suggest evenings with meaningful family time, gardening, cooking, spinning, sewing, and visiting. Other records show conditions so extreme that there was barely enough energy left to eat before sleep. Both are true somewhere. That uncertainty matters because slavery was not identical in every county, crop zone, or household. Yet the larger truth remains fixed. Whatever domestic life existed had to be built within a structure designed to keep it fragile. Objects carry unusual importance under such conditions. A wooden spoon carved by hand, a quilt pieced from scraps, a gourd cup, a stool made from salvaged boards, a walking stick polished smooth by use. These items are practical, yes, but they also store touch. Generations of handling leave surfaces glossy in places. A chest lid knows the weight of careful hands. A bowl knows the rhythm of repeated washing. A quilt knows exactly where shoulders curl beneath it. Material life becomes memory you can hold. In some homes, as decoration appears in modest and meaningful forms, shells on a shelf, pressed flowers, bits of coloured cloth, a bright kerchief saved for special use. White authorities often overlook these choices because they were trained to see black life through the narrow lens of labour value. But people naturally beautify what they inhabit. Even a corner of a rough room can be arranged with pride. There is no law of history stating that hardship abolishes taste. Weather changes everything indoors. In summer, the room holds heat after sunset, and insects whine at the edges of sleep. Skin sticks to fabric. Air feels thick, especially if many bodies share a small space. In winter, smoke and cold struggle for control of the room. The fire may warm one side of you while the other side stays chilled. Hands hover over coals. Toes curl under blankets. Breath briefly ghosts in the air before dawn. You learn the house through seasons the way sailors learn a ship, by where it leaks, groans, and unexpectedly protects. Home is also sound. The low scrape of a spoon in a bowl, fire snapping softly, a child whispering instead of sleeping, someone humming while folding cloth, a cough from the other side of the room, rain on shingles or leaves, wind pressing gently at the wall. Farther away, a dog barking, a wagon passing, an owl speaking from a tree line. These sounds make up an emotional map. They tell you whether the night is ordinary, tense, lonely, or briefly peaceful. Conversation, when people have enough strength for it, can range widely. News from nearby farms, rumours of a sale, a wedding, a birth, an illness, the price of corn, a man seen on the road with forged papers, a woman hired out to a new household, the behaviour of an overseer, the preaching at a Sunday gathering, stories from Africa preserved in fragments, family histories held entirely in memory, jokes too, because humour survives in stubborn places. Gentle mockery can make oppression look briefly foolish, which is one of its best uses. There are evenings when nothing feels abundant except fatigue. Bodies hurt, food runs short, tempers fray, children cry, clothes need mending and there is no light left to do it properly. An elderly person aches in the damp, a nursing mother is hungry again, a roof drip has started in the wrong corner. In these moments, home is not a romantic refuge, it is a site of effort. It asks one more thing from people already asked for too much, yet tenderness persists. A hand on a fevered forehead, a child bundled closer to the fire, a bowl portioned so the weakest person gets the largest share, a garment adjusted in the dim light, a song offered quietly to settle fear. These gestures rarely enter legal records, account books, or travellers' reports. They leave lighter traces than property transactions, but they are part of the true history of 1810 all the same. The expanding slave system is not only a story of labour extraction, it is also a story of the daily human work required to remain gentle when the surrounding order rewards hardness. As night settles fully, the room grows darker except for the hearth glow or a bit of candle if one can be spared. Smoke softens the edges of everything. The smell of supper lingers in the rafters. Fabric dries near the fire. Someone shifts on a pallet. Another person folds tomorrow into silence, already measuring what must be done at first light. Home in 1810 is never guaranteed safety. It is built from scraps, discipline, memory, and care. Sometimes that is enough to make a room feel almost sheltered. Sometimes it's only enough to let people endure until sleep takes them. Family in 1810 lives under a constant shadow. Love exists, certainly. Attachment is deep, ordinary, protective, and tender. But under slavery, affection is never allowed to stand on secure ground. A husband can be sent away, a wife can be hired out, a child can be promised, mortgaged, seized for debt, or sold with hardly more ceremony than a horse. The law often pretends not to notice the wound. The market notices only value. So family life for Black Americans is built with care, but also with a terrible awareness that every bond may be tested by power. You feel this most clearly in the small rituals that hold people together. A mother tying a child's head covering before dawn, a father checking a latch or patching a shoe by firelight, a grandmother smoothing a blanket across sleeping legs, a brother carrying a younger sister when the road is muddy. These gestures are quiet, but they reveal a full domestic world. The expanding slave system tried to reduce black people to labour units, yet family insisted on different meanings. Here is my child, here is my husband, here is my aunt, my uncle, my people. Such claims mattered even when courts refused to honour them. Marriage among enslaved people was often recognised by community custom, religious blessing, or mutual commitment rather than by legal protection. Some couples jumped a broom, some stood before a preacher, some simply agreed before witnesses and lived as husband and wife from that day onward. The forms varied. The seriousness did not. Enslavers might permit such unions, ignore them, manipulate them, or break them apart when convenient. A marriage could be emotionally real and socially honoured, yet legally fragile enough to vanish in the face of sale. Few institutions are more revealing than a society that praises family while reserving the right to break someone else's. Distance shaped many marriages. Husbands and wives were sometimes owned by different people on nearby farms or plantations. A man might walk miles on a Saturday night or Sunday to see his wife and children, then leave before dawn to avoid punishment. These journeys wore the body but nourished the heart. You can almost feel such a walk. Dust on the shoes, crickets in the ditch, night air cooling the face after a hot day. The excitement of reaching a familiar doorway. The ache of turning back before light. Love had miles in it. Children stood at the centre of this world, both as joy and as vulnerability. Infancy was dangerous because disease, malnutrition, and overwork around the mother threatened survival. Yet a child's first laugh, first steps, or first words still filled a cabin with meaning. The smell of warm skin after sleep, the weight of a toddler on one hip, the soft drag of little feet on a dirt floor. Small lives could brighten a hard household. They could also sharpen fear, because every parent knew a child was visible to owners as future labour and future sale value. The rule that children inherited the legal status of the mother gave slavery a cold internal engine. A free father could have an enslaved child if the mother was enslaved. An enslaved father had no legal authority over his own children. The law did not ask what was loving, faithful, or just. It asked only where ownership could most efficiently continue. Historians still dispute how openly many enslavers discuss children as investments inside daily household life, but plantation records, wills, and estate inventories leave little doubt that children were regularly counted as assets. This legal condition did not erase parenting, it intensified it. Mothers and fathers taught what they could in the time available. A child learned when to lower the eyes, when to speak carefully, which path to avoid, which white person was more dangerous, how to carry water without spilling, how to stay near older children, how to read mood in a voice before the words were fully clear. Some lessons were practical, some were moral, some were about survival so basic they almost feel like a second weather. A parent could not make the world safe, but could at least teach how to move through danger. Grandparents and older kin were especially important. In communities under pressure, elders often carried memory, discipline, healing knowledge, and continuity. An older woman might know births, deaths, marriages, nicknames, and family links that no paper preserved. An older man might remember a sale from 20 years ago, the direction a cousin was taken, or the exact song a now-dead relative used to sing at evening. These acts of remembering were not sentimental extras. They were a defence against erasure. If the system wanted to scatter people like loose grain, memory gathered them again. Kinship also extended beyond blood. Enslaved communities often formed broad networks of aunties, uncles, cousins, and godparent-like figures whose ties were social and emotional, rather than strictly biological. This mattered because slavery tore holes in families so often that other relationships had to help mend them. A child whose mother worked long hours might be watched by another woman nearby. A young man without living parents might learn discipline from an elder in the quarter. A widow might receive food from neighbours until she regained her footing. Family was not always a tidy tree. Sometimes it was a woven net. One quirky but telling detail from scattered accounts involves naming. Children might receive names that honoured kin, reflected biblical hopes, carried African echoes, or simply captured the affection of those around them. Nicknames flourished too. A small boy known for running could be called Rabbit. A girl with careful hands might carry a household name quite different from the one listed by an owner. Such naming practices mattered because naming is a claim of belonging. The ledger might say one thing. The people who loved you might say another. Separation haunted ordinary life. Estate settlements were especially dangerous. When an owner died, debts and inheritances could split a community with brutal efficiency. A woman might be left to one heir, her children to another, her husband sold to pay creditors. The sound of legal language made everything worse by pretending calm. Inventory, appraisement, distribution. Such terms glide across paper so politely, on the ground. They meant screaming, pleading, silence, numbness, and roads leading away in different directions. Sale was not always immediate or public, which almost made it crueler. Families could live for months under rumour. Will he be sold south? Has the master lost money? Did the overseer say anything at the store? Is the trader expected next week? Anxiety hung in the air like humidity before a storm. People watched horses arriving in the lane. They listened for unfamiliar voices. They noticed when an owner seemed unusually interested in ages, skills, and health. A household could go quiet all at once because everyone sensed that normal life was about to be interrupted. When separation came, people responded in many ways. Some begged, some negotiated through white intermediaries, some tried to follow a sold relative later, some preserved directions, names, landmarks, and remembered owners in the hope of reunion. Some gave children instructions to remember. Your mother's name is this. Your uncle lives near that river. Ask for this church. Do not forget your sister's scar on her wrist. These fragments were like maps spoken aloud. Families carried geography and memory because paper often belonged to somebody else. For free black families, danger took a different shape but remained real. Marriage could be recognised more securely in some northern places. Wages could support independent households, and children could sometimes attend schools created by black churches or mutual aid groups. Yet free families face legal discrimination, job insecurity, racist violence, and the risk of kidnapping into slavery. Imagine building a decent life, and still having to prove, at any wrong moment, that your children are not merchandise. Freedom existed, but it often stood with its coat on, ready to flee trouble. Religious life sometimes helped stabilize family bonds. Baptisms, weddings, funerals, and Sabbath gatherings gave communal form to private attachment. A couple blessed before neighbours gained moral recognition even without legal standing. A funeral prayer placed the dead inside a circle of witness rather than leaving grief entirely alone. In some communities, elders counselled younger couples about constancy and mutual care. Very human, very ordinary, and therefore quietly radical in a system that preferred disposable relations among the enslaved. Scholars continue to debate the degree to which enslaved family life should be described mainly through resilience or mainly through damage. The argument is understandable because both elements are so visible. Families displayed remarkable strength, continuity, and creativity under impossible conditions. At the same time, the trauma of sale, forced migration, sexual coercion, and chronic insecurity mark these relationships deeply. Any history that celebrates black family endurance without naming the violence that made such endurance necessary becomes sentimental. Any history that sees only damage misses the force of love that persisted anyway. sexual exploitation formed one of the darkest pressures on family life. Enslaved women were vulnerable to coercion from owners, overseers, and other white men who faced little consequence. The result could be fear inside daily routines, tension inside marriages, pregnancies shaped by violence, and children born into a system that refused to acknowledge the injustice at their origin. People found ways to protect one another when they could, but power made protection incomplete. The silence around this subject in many older records is not evidence of rarity. It is evidence of shame and domination. Even under such conditions, courtship existed. Young people noticed each other at worship, at work, on visits between farms, or during holiday gatherings when movement loosened slightly. A look held a moment too long. A joke offered while carrying water. A ribbon adjusted carefully. A song sung a little louder when someone particular was near. Desire survived. Flirtation survived. Human beings kept making room for tenderness in places that rewarded hardness. That might be one of the most stubborn facts in all of history. Parents also passed on hopes, not just warnings. A mother might teach a daughter fine sewing if she knew it. A father might show a son how to shape wood, handle animals, or judge the weather. Someone might teach letters in secret if the chance appeared. Someone else might pass on a prayer, a recipe, a proverb, or the exact tone needed to calm a frightened child. These teachings were gifts aimed at the future. Even when the future looked unreliable, night was often when family life became most visible. Work loosened its grip slightly, and the room filled with voices, low conversation, shared food, and the uneven peace of tired people in one place. A baby nursed. A child fell asleep mid-sentence. Two adults spoke quietly at the edge of the fire about a rumour, a debt, a cousin, a Sunday plan. The sounds were soft. The meanings were immense. Family was not simply who shared your blood. It was who made the room feel less hostile to the soul, and yet every comfort remained conditional. A knock at the door, a message from the big house, a debt coming due, a trader on the road, a new overseer with a taste for disruption. The expanding slave system treated black family life as something to tolerate only until profit demanded otherwise. That is why every ordinary expression of devotion carried unusual weight. To braid a child's hair, to sit beside a spouse, to bury a parent properly, to remember a cousin sold years earlier, all became acts of quiet insistence. So when you imagine black family life in 1810, you should not imagine either constant domestic harmony or complete social ruin. You should imagine people building attachment under pressure, guarding one another where possible, mourning where necessary, and using memory as a shelter when law offered none. You should imagine marriages walked into by moonlight, children named with care, elders carrying history in their voices, and households listening always for danger just outside the circle of firelight. Family endured, not because the system allowed it, but because people refused to surrender it completely. When the day has pressed hard enough on the body, people often turn toward whatever can steady the inner life. In 1810, for black Americans living within slavery and its surrounding prejudices, faith is not merely a formal doctrine recited on command. It is a refuge, a rhythm, a habit of attention, and sometimes a language for hope when ordinary speech feels too exposed. Belief can enter a room as softly as candlelight. It can also move through a crowd with enough force to make tired people stand straighter, sing louder, and feel, for one precious hour, that the world is not arranged exactly as their oppressors claim. You notice religion first through sound. A low murmur over food, a whispered blessing before sleep, a half-sung line rising from one voice and answered by another. Prayer in black communities is not always formal, and it is not always public. Sometimes it happens in a field edge while hands keep working. Sometimes it happens beside a sick bed. Sometimes it gathers people in a cabin, a brush arbor, a church balcony, a yard after dusk, or a patch of woods where the air smells of pine, damp leaves, and secrecy. The setting changes. The need does not. Christianity is widespread by 1810, but it reaches black Americans through uneven and often controlling channels. Some enslaved people encounter it through white ministers who preach obedience, patience, and heavenly reward with suspicious enthusiasm. Others hear the same Bible and notice very different things. They hear about Israel in bondage, Moses before Pharaoh, Daniel surviving hostile power, and a Saviour who blesses the poor and humbles the mighty. Scripture turns out to be difficult to cage. White authorities may emphasize submission. Black listeners may hear deliverance in the next breath. This difference in interpretation matters. Religion inside slavery is never just religion. It is also a contest over meaning. A white preacher may stand in a church and speak of servants obeying masters as if God had taken a job in estate management. Yet the people listening are not empty vessels. They compare sermon words with lived experience. They measure the preacher's tone. They listen for what is left unsaid. And when they gather among themselves later, the same verses may bloom into something far richer, sadder, and more courageous. You can picture one of these gatherings at night. The room is small, warm from bodies and fire. Smoke clings lightly to the rafters. A child sleeps against an older woman's shoulder. Someone clears a throat. Someone else begins a hymn line slowly, almost testing the room. Then other voices join, not polished, not timid, but full. The sound thickens. Hands tap, knees. Feet keep a gentle beat against the floorboards. The music carries fatigue, longing, grief, and a kind of fierce sweetness. Singing does what speech cannot always do. It lets emotion travel farther. Music within black religious life often draws strength from call and response, repetition, improvisation, and bodily feeling. A leader offers a line, and others answer. One voice bends a melody, and the room follows. The song may move slowly, rocking on a few simple phrases, or gather force until the walls seem to pulse with it. White observers sometimes describe this kind of worship as excessive or strange, which is one more way of saying they noticed feeling and preferred control. But music that involves the whole body can be profoundly grounding. Breath deepens, posture changes. A weary spine remembers how to rise. The spiritual atmosphere of these meetings often includes more than formal prayer and hymn singing. Testimony matters too. A man speaks about surviving a dangerous illness. A woman thanks God for a child's recovery. Another asks for strength because a husband has been hired out again. Someone confesses fear. Someone else answers with comfort. The room becomes a place where private burdens are spoken aloud and therefore shared. Under slavery, where people are so often denied full personhood, being listened to with seriousness can feel almost medicinal. Some gatherings happen under white supervision. There may be a church service where black worshippers sit in a gallery, on benches apart, or outside the main body of the congregation. They are present but not equal. They hear the same scripture while occupying a visibly lower place in the room. Architecture can preach just as loudly as the minister. A balcony rail, a side entrance, a segregated pew, all announce hierarchy without needing many words. And yet even there, people create their own religious experience through subtle glances, remembered songs, shared phrases, and private interpretation. Other worship settings are more independent. Free black communities in northern cities are building churches of their own by this time, and these institutions carry enormous significance. They are not only houses of prayer, they are places of leadership, mutual aid, schooling, political discussion, and community dignity. To step into a black-led church is to feel a different social arrangement for a little while. The voices at the front belong to people who know the congregation from within. The prayers sound less like supervision and more like recognition. The air feels different when authority is not pretending to own your soul. Among enslaved people in the South, independent worship may be more constrained, but it still emerges in small and meaningful ways. a prayer meeting in secret, a ring of people in the woods, a hymn sung softly while walking back from labour, a gathering after dark when the stars are clear and the ground still holds the day's warmth. The smell of crushed grass, damp bark, and human closeness lingers around such scenes. Night insects hum steadily. Somewhere farther off, a dog barks. Every sound matters because secrecy has its own acoustics. Historians still argue over how separate black Christianity in 1810 was from white evangelical influence in different regions. Some emphasize the degree of white oversight and the shared revival culture of the era. Others stress the distinct theological and emotional forms developing within black communities, rooted partly in African continuities and partly in lived experience under slavery. The evidence suggests both entanglement and originality. Black religion was not created in a vacuum, yet neither was it a mere copy. It was being remade through need, memory, and collective feeling. African cultural continuities are often subtle but important here. Rhythmic movement, communal participation, spiritual intensity, sacred use of repetition, and a less rigid separation between body and devotion all appear in ways that scholars connect, carefully and sometimes cautiously, to West and Central African traditions reshaped in the Americas. No single line runs cleanly from one continent to one cabin. History is never that tidy. But the emotional texture of worship, the cadence, the sway, the layered voice, often reveals a heritage deeper than the plantation ledger. A quirky detail from scattered accounts involves prayer cloths, lucky objects, or little keepsakes carried close during worship or moments of fear, a folded scrap tucked into a bodice, a carved token in a pocket, a root tied discreetly with string. To outsiders, these things could look odd or superstitious. To the person carrying them, they might hold memory, protection, family meaning, or spiritual assurance. Religion in daily life is rarely as clean and doctrinal as official sermons pretend. It tends to collect ordinary human needs and tuck them into practical forms. The Bible, when available, can be cherished deeply, though access to literacy varies sharply. Many enslaved people are denied education on purpose, because literacy threatens control. Still, some learn letters in secret. Some hear scripture read so often that whole passages live in memory. A verse remembered by ear can be as sustaining as one read from a page. Imagine the comfort of carrying words inside you when so little else can truly be kept. A psalm becomes shelter, a promise becomes breath. Faith also shapes the understanding of death. Mortality in 1810 is familiar and near. Children die. Mothers die in childbirth. Illness sweeps through crowded spaces. Work injuries take lives. Punishment can do the same. In such a world, funeral customs matter intensely. A burial is not only disposal of the dead, it is witness. It is memory made public. It is the community refusing to let a life pass unmarked. A song at a graveside, earth striking wood, hands joined in prayer. All of it says this person belonged somewhere. Grief in black communities often carries both sorrow and a disciplined beauty. Women may keen softly or weep openly. Men may stand still and grave, then suddenly sing. Children watch and absorb the meaning of ceremony. The smell of turned soil rises sharply at a burial. Clothes brush against one another in the wind. Someone clears a throat and begins a hymn. In that moment, the world seems to pause just enough for love to become visible. Religious language can also sharpen resistance, even when resistance remains quiet. To believe that all souls are equal before God undermines the moral logic of slavery. To pray for deliverance is already to imagine another arrangement of power. To tell the story of Pharaoh is to identify tyranny clearly, even when names are left unspoken. Not every prayer meeting is political in an explicit sense, yet spiritual life creates inner territory that ownership cannot completely penetrate. Once a person believes that the master does not stand at the top of the true order of things, something important has shifted. This does not mean faith always brings comfort. It can also bring difficult questions. Why does suffering continue? Why are children taken? Why do the violent prosper? Why does justice seem so delayed? These are not abstract philosophical puzzles in 1810. They are lived pressures pressing against prayer itself. Some believers answer by trusting divine timing. Others cling to small mercies. Others move between confidence and doubt depending on the day. Devotion is not always serene. Sometimes it is simply stubborn. For free black people, churches often become the backbone of organised community life. Collections are taken for the poor. Widows receive support. Children may learn letters. Leaders discuss petitions, job opportunities, marriages, burials, and the threats facing free people of colour. The church basement, meeting room, or yard carries practical importance alongside sacred meaning. Religion and mutual aid stand shoulder to shoulder. It makes perfect sense. In an unequal society, holiness often has to learn bookkeeping. Women play central roles in the spiritual world, though official leadership titles may not always reflect that power. They organise meals, tend the sick, lead songs, teach children, pray with force, preserve stories, and steady entire gatherings through tone and presence. A room can change when a respected older woman begins to speak. People quiet down. They listen. Her authority may not appear in a printed church notice, but it lives unmistakably in the bodies around her, men to find spiritual roles as exhorters, preachers, deacons, singers, and moral examples, though their ability to exercise leadership may be constrained by white supervision, travel limits, or ownership status. A gifted black preacher could move a congregation deeply, whether speaking in a formal church or in the open air. Cadence mattered, so did memory. So did the ability to tie scripture to ordinary suffering without flattening either one. A sermon was never only information, it was atmosphere, persuasion, warning, and comfort braided together. The soundscape of devotion remains one of the clearest ways to understand its power. You hear a low hum before the words fully form. You hear an answering line from the far side of the room. You hear hands meeting softly, then more firmly. You hear a voice crack with feeling and keep going. The room grows warmer, though perhaps no extra wood has been added to the fire. For a little while, the pressure of the outside world loosens, not vanishes. Never that, but loosens. And that may be the crucial point. Faith in 1810 does not erase slavery, prejudice, poverty, or danger. Song does not end the auction block. Prayer does not stop the overseer's hand. Yet belief and worship provide forms of courage, interpretation, and communal feeling that make survival less lonely. They give language to suffering and shape to hope. They permit laughter too, unexpectedly enough, because gatherings full of song and prayer can also carry wit, teasing, and affection. Holiness is not always solemn. Sometimes it smiles through tired eyes. So when night settles and voices rise from cabins, clearings, galleries, and church rooms, you hear more than religion in a narrow sense. You hear people making meaning under pressure. You hear grief-given melody. You hear hope practiced aloud. You hear a community refusing to let the spirit become another item of property. And in the hush that follows the final hymn or prayer, in the soft crackle of coals and the fading warmth of joined voices, you feel the deep strength of lives still held together by faith, song, and secret reserves of dignity. In 1810, the city feels different from the countryside the moment you enter it. The air is thicker with smoke, salt, mud, and noise. Streets carry the rattle of wheels, the slap of shoes on boards and stone, the calls of vendors, the creak of cranes, the complaints of gulls, and the endless argument of commerce with itself. For black Americans, urban life can seem at first like a place of motion and possibility, because so many people are moving in so many directions. But the city is not freedom simply because it is crowded. It is another kind of pressure, another arrangement of labour, surveillance, and uncertainty, dressed in brick and harbour water. You might be in Baltimore, Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Philadelphia, New York, or a smaller port town tied into the same restless Atlantic economy. Ships arrive with goods, news, rumours, sailors, migrants, and danger. Wharves are busy from dawn. Warehouses breathe out dust and damp. Taverns hum with drink and boasting. Market stalls crowd close with fish, vegetables, bread, cloth, barrels, and voices rising over one another. You smell tar, rope hemp, horse manure, spilled ale, frying meat, river stink, and hot brick after rain. The whole place feels alive, though not in a way that cares whether you're comfortable. Black people in cities occupy many roles at once. Some are free and earn wages as sailors, washerwomen, barbers, labourers, coachmen, cooks, seamstresses, caulkers, cart drivers, or small traders. Others are enslaved and hired out by their owners, moving through workshops, kitchens, stables, docks, and private homes while their earnings are collected by somebody else. The difference between freedom and slavery remains enormous. But in urban settings, the two conditions can sometimes appear side by side in the same street, which creates both opportunity and unease. One person carries proof of free status in a pocket, another carries a pass. Both know the wrong white official may ask questions. The hired-out system is especially common in some cities, and it gives urban slavery a distinct rhythm. An owner may place an enslaved man with a carpenter, a mason, or a shipping concern. An enslaved woman may be sent into domestic service, laundry work, market selling, or sewing. Sometimes the worker turns over all wages. Sometimes a portion is allowed to remain for food, clothing, or small personal needs. Historians still debate how much independence this arrangement created in practice, because the answer changed with each city, each owner, and each job. In some cases, hired-out labour opened room for wider social contact and limited self-direction. In other cases, it merely wrapped slavery in the appearance of mobility. That appearance can be misleading. A black man walking quickly across a waterfront with tools on his shoulder may look purposeful and self-directed, yet he may be on an errand timed by someone else, watched by patrols, and vulnerable to punishment if delayed. A woman carrying bundles through a market may know dozens of people, prices, shortcuts, and neighbourhood rhythms, yet still belong in law to a household that can sell her without warning. Cities create movement, but movement is not the same as control over your own life. The distinction matters very much. On the docks, labour is relentless. You lift bales, roll barrels, coil ropes, sweep holds, load carts, and move cargo according to tide and schedule. Your hands smell of hemp, tar, wood, and salt. The planks underfoot may be slick with spray or slime. Fish scales glint near gutters. Sailcloth snaps overhead. Orders come in bursts. Lift here, move there. Mind that crate. Watch the horse. Every task has weight in it, and every delay has witnesses. Ships compress time. When a vessel must be turned around, everyone below the merchant class discovers urgency at once. Skilled trades can offer a little status within black urban communities. A cooper who makes barrels, a ship caulker sealing hull seams, a blacksmith repairing ironwork, or a carpenter fitting doors and beams may gain respect for competence and reliability. Skill can sometimes bring steadier wages, a stronger social network, and knowledge of valuable spaces in the city. But skill also increases one's marketability to owners and employers. A talented man may be praised all morning and rented out more aggressively by afternoon. Praise under slavery has a suspicious smell to it. Usually money is standing nearby. Women's labour in urban spaces is just as essential and often less publicly honoured. Laundry work fills yards with steam, dripping cloth, and tired arms. Cooking in private homes means long hours over heat, handling food that confirms somebody else's gentility. Seamstresses bend over repairs by dim light. Washerwomen haul heavy wet fabric that pulls at the shoulders and wrists. Market women may carry baskets, bargain fiercely, and maintain complicated webs of exchange that keep households running. Their knowledge of prices, gossip, credit, and character can be astonishing. Cities often depend on women's practical intelligence while pretending not to notice it. Domestic service in townhouses brings a special kind of closeness to white wealth. You polish silver, carry trays, light fires, brush coats, wash windows, change bedding, mind children, and keep rooms elegant for people who may barely look at you except to complain. The touch of polished wood, linen, brass, hot water, and waxed floors becomes part of your day. So does the sound of bells summoning service from another room. Indoor labour can look refined from the outside. Inside it, you discover that refinement requires a lot of scrubbing. Markets are some of the most vivid spaces in urban black life. They are noisy, social, and full of information. A trip to market may involve fish laid on wet boards, chickens complaining in crates, greens tied in bundles, fruit bruising in the heat, and women calling prices over one another with practiced force. Here you hear news that would never travel through official channels. A sailor mentions a riot in another city. A carter reports on a new law. A free black artisan knows who is hiring. A woman selling cakes hears whose landlord is pressing rent. The market is not only for food, it is for intelligence. A quirky detail from urban records involves the small trades and side earnings that flourished around the edges of formal labour. Some people sold pies, cakes, oysters, herbs, matches, or second-hand garments. Others mended shoes, carried messages, shaved customers, or offered hairdressing services. A child might run errands for pennies. A woman might keep a tiny unofficial economy alive through skill, nerve, and good memory. These earnings rarely made anyone secure, but they could support a room, a meal, a church donation, or a child's clothing. Small money mattered because it represented small choices. Housing in the city was often cramped and unstable. Free black families might rent 1 or 2 rooms in alleys, back buildings, or upper floors. Enslaved workers might sleep in kitchens, garrets, yard rooms, or shared quarters attached to a business or household. The air indoors holds smoke, damp cloth, cooking smells, and too many breaths in too little space. Walls are thin, privacy is fragile. The sounds of the street seep in even at night. Wheels, footsteps, arguments, laughter from taverns, dogs barking, infants crying, distant harbour noise. Urban sleep is never entirely quiet, yet those same dense neighbourhoods can support vibrant black social life. People visit after work, food is shared, children are watched by more than one set of eyes, churches and aid societies give form to neighbourhood belonging, sailors bring stories, artisans bring contacts, women pass along domestic advice, warnings, and practical strategies for dealing with employers. In close quarters, trouble travels fast, but so does care. A person taken ill may receive broth from next door. A widow may receive help with rent. A newly arrived migrant may learn where to find work by evening. Free black churches are especially powerful in cities. They gather worship, dignity, and organisation into one visible institution. To enter one is to step into a place where black voices lead from the front, where prayer is not filtered through white approval, and where the concerns of the congregation are understood firsthand. These churches often anchor schools, burial funds, mutual aid efforts, and public petitioning. They are spiritual homes, certainly, but also practical headquarters for endurance in a hostile republic. Cities also expose black Americans to the full texture of racial hierarchy in public. There are curfews, pass requirements, segregated seating, insults shouted from doorways, suspicious constables, and officials who assume black mobility is inherently improper. Free people may be required to register their status, carry papers, or answer challenges from white strangers. Enslaved people may need written permission to move after certain hours. The result is a daily choreography of caution. You carry yourself in ways meant to reduce friction, though friction finds you anyway. Kidnapping is one of the great fears in urban black life, especially for free people. In northern cities, kidnappers sometimes seize black adults or children and attempt to sell them south into slavery. This threat gives every unfamiliar hand, every false offer, and every missing child notice a chilling weight. Freedom can feel less like a solid wall and more like a narrow ledge over a steep drop. Parents warn children whom not to trust. Adults watch one another's movements with unusual care. The city crowd that offers concealment can also swallow a person quickly. Sailors occupy a fascinating place in this world. Black seamen, both free and enslaved, move through ports carrying wages, stories, skills, and wider horizons. A sailor may have seen Caribbean islands, northern ports, foreign flags, and kinds of authority arranged differently than they are at home. He may dress with a little flair when ashore, spending carefully on food, drink, or clothing that marks his trade. The smell of tar and salt follows him. His speech carries names of places others have never seen. White authorities often distrust such men because they bring ideas along with cargo. Information moves through barbershops too. The barber hears everything: political gossip, commercial rumour, private scandal, shipping news, and neighbourhood trouble all pass through a chair and under a razor. Black barbers in some cities serve white customers, which creates one of those deeply American scenes where intimacy and inequality sit absurdly close together. A white gentleman entrusts his throat to a black barber's steady hand, while likely insisting on racial superiority as a general principle. History sometimes writes its jokes very dryly. For women, city life can offer degrees of sociability and resourcefulness less available in isolated rural settings, but it also multiplies risk. A domestic servant may be more exposed to sexual predation in an urban household. A washerwoman walking before dawn may face harassment in dark streets. A market seller may be fined, cheated, or shoved aside by officials and rivals. Still, many black women built formidable reputations for competence, piety, mutual aid, and economic savvy. The city often ran on their labour and memory. Scholars continue to discuss whether urban slavery was generally milder than rural slavery. The evidence refuses any easy answer. Cities could offer more contact, more information, occasional wage opportunities, and a wider community. They could also impose intense supervision, unstable employment, disease, sexual danger, and harsh punishment. A crowded street does not automatically soften power. Sometimes it only gives power more corners from which to watch. Disease is another constant feature of urban life. Yellow fever, smallpox, influenza, and other illnesses haunt port cities, especially where water is foul, waste accumulates, and people live close together. The smell of sickness in a room is unforgettable. Vinegar, sweat, damp bedding, stale air, and fear. Black communities cared for the sick with limited resources, often relying on women's labour, church support, herbal remedies, and practical nursing skill. Epidemics revealed both the fragility of city life and the strength of neighbourhood bonds. At night, the city changes but does not fully rest. Taverns remain noisy, lamps throw weak circles onto muddy or uneven streets, harbour ropes knock against masts in the dark. Somewhere a fiddle is playing, somewhere a child is coughing, somewhere a cart still rolls late. Enslaved workers hurry back under past limits. Free labourers count wages or discover that wages have been cut again. Women settle children in close hot rooms. Men compare rumours of jobs, laws, and patrols. The city keeps breathing, uneasy and alert. So urban black life in 1810 is a world of narrow freedoms, hired out labour, crowded neighbourhoods, skilled trades, constant paperwork, and public vulnerability. It is full of motion without guarantee, contact without safety, and opportunity hemmed in by racial control. Yet it is also a place where Black Americans create churches, networks, small economies, and practical intelligence sharp enough to navigate streets that do not welcome them fully. In the clatter of carts, the wash of tide, the heat of kitchens, and the din of markets, they carve out lives that are never easy, sometimes precarious, and always more complex than the city's ledgers would suggest. Freedom in 1810 is real, but it is rarely relaxed. For Black Americans who are legally free, daily life carries a strange double quality. You can wake in your own room, choose certain forms of work, marry with more security, worship in your own church, and move through the world without belonging on paper to another person. That is no small difference. It is everything. And yet freedom arrives surrounded by suspicion, restriction, and the constant reminder that white society does not consider Black independence a comfortable fact. You are free, but you are expected to explain yourself. The first sensation of this kind of life is often vigilance. You keep documents safe. You remember names, dates, and witnesses. You know which officials are hostile, which neighbourhoods are risky, which roads are better avoided after dark, and which white employers are likely to delay wages or pretend confusion when payment is due. You notice questions quickly. Where are you going? Who knows you here? Why are you out this late? Freedom ought to feel like open air. Often it feels like air with a hand hovering near your shoulder. In northern cities and towns, free Black communities are growing by 1810, though not in conditions anyone would confuse with equality. Emancipation in some states has been gradual. In others, slavery still lingers in legal or practical forms. A free Black family might live in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Newport, or a smaller place where jobs cluster near the harbour, the market, and domestic service. Some rent narrow rooms in alleys or modest streets. Others board with kin or church members while trying to establish a household of their own. The smell of the neighbourhood may be coal smoke, wet wood, cooking grease, horse traffic, and river damp. The details vary, the tension remains. Work is central to survival, and free Black people often pursue whatever labour white employers will allow. Men may find employment as sailors, porters, barbers, coachmen, caulkers, labourers, or small craftsmen. Women may earn money through washing, domestic service, seam work, nursing, or market selling. There is skill in this labour, pride in it, and often a fierce determination to support a household without falling into debt. Still, discrimination cuts through nearly every trade. Jobs can disappear with little warning. Wages may be lower than those paid to white workers. Certain apprenticeships and guild paths remain blocked. The Republic loves competition in theory and exclusion in practice. Even success can feel fragile. A free Black artisan who builds a solid reputation may still be limited by licensing rules, white hostility, or customers who prefer to praise his work while resisting his advancement. A washerwoman known for reliability may still be cheated by employers who assume she has no easy recourse. A barber may serve wealthy white clients every week and still be treated as socially inferior by men who trust him with a razor at their throat. This is one of the absurd mechanics of racial hierarchy. It depends on Black competence while resenting Black independence. Home life among free Black families often reflects thrift, discipline, and community support. A rented room or small house might hold a table, a few chairs, a trunk, bedding, crockery, tools, and perhaps a treasured Bible or hymnal. The room smells of soap, cooked greens, damp wool in winter, warm dust in summer, and the ordinary closeness of people making a life within narrow means. Children are washed, dressed, scolded, taught manners, and sent on errands. Supper is portioned carefully. Candles are used sparingly. Rent is always waiting like an uninvited guest at the edge of the room. Churches stand at the centre of much free Black life. They offer worship, certainly, but also something larger and more practical. A black church in 1810 can be a place of leadership, schooling, mutual aid, burial support, and moral authority. You enter and feel the difference immediately. The voices at the front belong to people from your own community. The prayers sound like lived knowledge rather than supervision. The air holds wood polish, wool clothing, human breath, candle wax, and the hush before song. A sermon may address sin, discipline, and salvation, but it may also speak quietly to endurance, dignity, and the necessity of helping one another in a world eager to divide the vulnerable. Mutual aid is one of the great strengths of free black communities. Burial societies, benevolent associations, women's groups, and church collections help families survive illness, death, job loss, and sudden need. These organisations matter because poverty is common and public assistance is often stingy or hostile. A widow may need help with rent, a child may need shoes, a sick labourer may need broth, coal, and someone to sit by the bed. Free black people build systems of care because they must. Society offers too little. Community steps in where the state shrugs. Education carries enormous significance. Some free black parents work hard to place children in schools founded by churches, reformers, or black communities themselves. Schooling may be irregular, underfunded, or segregated, but the hope attached to letters and numbers is powerful. A child learning to read is not simply gaining a skill. The child is entering a wider field of thought and record. The scratch of chalk, the rustle of paper, the careful sound of spelling aloud. All of it can feel almost thrilling. Knowledge promises a different kind of footing in the world, even if racism does its best to deny that promise. Historians still debate how optimistic free black communities in the early republic felt about progress. Some evidence points to remarkable confidence in the institution building, Christian reform, education, and petitioning for rights. Other evidence reveals deep realism about white prejudice and the narrowness of legal protections. The truth likely lives in the tension between those moods. Hope and caution walk together. To build a school, a church, or a society in 1810 required belief in the future. To carry freedom papers at all times required awareness of how quickly that future could be threatened. The threat of kidnapping shadows daily life. Free black people, especially in border regions and even in northern cities, know that criminal networks and opportunists may seize adults or children and attempt to sell them into slavery. This danger is not abstract. It alters behaviour. Parents warn children not to wander. Neighbours keep watch. A person travelling alone may seek company or visible witnesses. Papers are folded carefully and checked often. Imagine needing proof of your own liberty because another person might steal it. That is the texture of insecure freedom. Legal discrimination deepens the pressure. In many states, free black people cannot vote, serve on juries, testify equally, or access the same public resources as white citizens. Militia service may be denied. Public transport, schools, and churches may be segregated or informally closed off. Immigration rules in some places aim to discourage free black settlement. Even where the law does not explicitly bar every path, custom does a great deal of work. A hostile clerk, a suspicious constable, a landlord with sudden excuses, all can limit a life without any dramatic proclamation. Oppression often prefers paperwork and tone. In the South, the situation is often more precarious still. Free black people, they may own property, work trades, support families, and in some cases even acquire modest wealth. But they live in societies built around slavery and deeply suspicious of black autonomy. Travel restrictions, registration requirements, special taxes, and curfews can apply. Local whites may resent any free black person whose competence contradicts the racial order they prefer. The free black household becomes both proof that independence is possible and a target for regulation because of that very proof. One curious detail from the period involves the enormous practical value of papers, certificates, and copies of legal records. These documents are folded, wrapped, hidden, stitched into clothing, stored in boxes, and guarded like treasure. A scrap of paper may determine whether a person walks home at night or is jailed as a suspected fugitive. It may protect a marriage, a child, or a job. The texture of paper itself becomes emotional, dry, thin, fragile, and somehow heavy with consequence. Few objects in early black freedom carry more anxiety in the hand. Free black communities also cultivate respectability with strategic care. Clothing is kept clean when possible. Children are instructed in politeness. Church-going matters, marriage matters, property ownership, however modest, matters. This is not simply imitation of the white values. It is partly a defensive strategy, partly an expression of internal discipline, and partly a declaration that black people possess the same moral seriousness denied them by racist ideology. Of course, respectability does not stop prejudice. A well-dressed black man can still be insulted. A devout black woman can still be shut out. Yet public presentation remains one tool among many in the struggle for dignity. At the same time, free black life is not all solemn self-policing. There is pleasure too. Children play in streets and yards. Neighbours visit. Courtships begin at church doors or community events. Meals are shared. Music enters rooms after work. Women laugh while hanging laundry. Men swap stories at the dockside or outside a shop. There are celebrations for weddings, births, and holidays. There are jokes, little vanities, rivalries, and ordinary gossip. Freedom may be hemmed in, but it still allows forms of everyday joy that slavery continually threatens to crush. Economic life in these communities can be surprisingly intricate. A woman selling cakes or sewing for several households may build a network of credit and trust. A man with a cart may transport goods for multiple merchants and know which businesses are growing. Boarding arrangements link newcomers to established families. Church leaders may recommend reliable workers. Informal loans circulate through friendships and kinship ties. None of this guarantees prosperity, but it creates structure. Black communities become knowledgeable about their own survival in ways outsiders rarely bother to understand. Public prejudice can be humiliating in small, grinding ways. White children may mock black adults in the street. Employers may use first names where titles would normally be given. A shopkeeper may delay service or monitor every movement inside the store. A preacher may welcome donations while discouraging equal fellowship. These moments are difficult precisely because they are ordinary. They do not always make history books, yet they shape the atmosphere of freedom just as much as laws do. A person can feel the edge of exclusion in the body before naming it clearly. Free black leaders increasingly respond with organisation and petition. Men and women in churches and benevolent societies write appeals, advocate schooling, condemn kidnapping, and insist on moral and civic recognition. The language may be formal, but the motive is intimate. They are speaking for children, spouses, neighbours, and futures not yet fully formed. The scratching of pen on paper can carry a surprising amount of courage. Written protest is not noisy, but it refuses silence. Women's leadership in these communities is especially important, even where official recognition remains limited. They manage households, stretch wages, care for the sick, preserve respectability, organise charity, and sustain church life with practical force. Their labour is constant and often undervalued, but it holds the social fabric together. A widow keeping children clothed and fed on laundry money, a churchwoman organising support for a burial, a seamstress teaching younger girls careful habits. All are builders of freedom in the most literal sense. For children born free, identity itself carries complexity. They grow up hearing that they are free, yet watching parents carry papers and calculate danger. They may attend school, yet face mockery in the street. They may know that slavery still binds many other black people, perhaps even relatives. Freedom is their normal condition, but not their unquestioned inheritance. Adults teach them both pride and caution. Stand straight. Speak clearly. Do not linger there. Keep close to home. Remember your name. Remember where your papers are kept. Night in a free black neighborhood can feel both companionable and exposed. Candlelight glows through thin curtains. A hymn drifts from one room. Somewhere a fiddle answers from another. Soup smells rise through stairwells. Boots scrape on steps. A mother hushes a baby. A father counts coins on a table and wonders whether they will cover rent and fuel. Beyond the circle of domestic sound lies the wider city, where patrols move, drunks shout, and danger can still come quickly. Freedom sleeps lightly. So to be free in 1810 is to live in a space between achievement and insecurity. You can build institutions, support a family, gather in your own church, educate children, and claim yourself before the world. Yet at nearly every turn, prejudice tries to narrow the meaning of that freedom. The free black communities of the early republic answer with endurance, paperwork, mutual aid, discipline, worship, and public courage. They are not fully safe. They are not fully accepted, but they are very much alive, making homes and futures in a nation that keeps asking them to justify both. Not all resistance announces itself with a shout. In 1810, for black Americans living under slavery, defiance is often quiet because quiet has a better chance of surviving the day. It slips into ordinary actions, into timing, into silence, into memory, into the careful use of a face that reveals less than it feels. Open revolt is rare and terribly dangerous, but resistance lives everywhere once you know how to look for it. It lives in the body that refuses to become only a tool. It lives in the mind that keeps a private map. It lives in the hand that learns, hides, delays, preserves, or reaches for something forbidden. You begin with the smallest acts because the smallest acts are often the most constant. An enslaved worker slows a task just enough to reclaim a breath. A woman pockets a bit of food for a child. A man pretends not to understand a cruel instruction the first time it is given. Someone protects a loved one by taking blame for a broken item. Someone else keeps silent about another person's plan to visit family at night. Resistance does not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it looks like one human being refusing to cooperate fully with a system that wants total access to every minute and motive. The art of seeming compliant while thinking independently becomes essential. You learn to control expression, tone, and pace. Too much eagerness may invite more demands. Too much reluctance may invite punishment. So people develop an alert, disciplined style of self-presentation that hides intention when necessary. This kind of self-command is not submission, it is strategy. A lowered gaze may conceal anger, a respectful answer may cover calculation. To survive under constant observation, the face itself becomes a kind of shield. Running away is one of the clearest forms of resistance, though it is also one of the most perilous. Some people flee for a day or two to escape punishment, visit family, or pressure an owner after harsh treatment. Others attempt permanent escape, travelling by night, following rivers, roads, stars, or whispered directions. The journey is full of danger, dogs, patrols, hunger, exposure, betrayal, and simple bad luck all threaten the fugitive, yet still people go. That fact alone tells you something enormous about the condition they are leaving. No one risks swamps, forests, strangers, and chains for a mild inconvenience. You can imagine such a flight in sensory detail. The wet smell of reeds near a riverbank, mud pulling at the shoes, branches scraping the sleeves, a heart beating too hard in the throat when a distant dog barks, the peculiar brightness of stars when you dare to look up for direction, the ache of hunger mixed with fear, the relief of hearing only insects for a few minutes and not human voices. Escape is not a clean heroic line. It is cold, uncertain, and physically miserable. It is also one of the most powerful declarations a person can make. I do not accept this condition. Not everyone who runs seeks the north. Geography is more complicated than later legend sometimes suggests. Some run to nearby woods, marshes, or towns. Some seek relatives on another plantation. Some hide with free black communities. Some board ships. Some move toward Spanish Florida in earlier periods. Some vanish into city crowds. Historians still debate the scale and patterns of short-term absence versus permanent flight in different regions, because records are uneven and owners often describe both under the same anxious language of fugitivity. But the pattern is clear enough. Movement itself becomes an argument against ownership. Literacy is another quiet frontier of resistance. Laws and customs in many places try to restrict black education because reading and writing make control harder. A person who can read a pass, a Bible verse, a newspaper scrap, or a map has gained a dangerous kind of independence. So letters are learned in secret. A child overhears lessons meant for white children. A free black neighbour shares knowledge after dark. A preacher teaches from memory. An older person traces shapes in ash, dirt, or scraps of paper. The act looks simple. The meaning is immense. There is something wonderfully stubborn about learning letters in a world that says you should remain unreadable even to yourself. The scratch of charcoal, the careful shaping of a name, the moment when a page stops being mysterious marks and begins to speak. Such moments rarely survive in official archives because power has little interest in recording the private expansion of a captive mind. But you can feel their importance. To read is to possess a tool that moves through walls more easily than the body can. Songs, stories, and coded speech also belong to this hidden landscape. A work song may carry double meaning. A folk tale may disguise a lesson about cunning, patience, or reversal. A phrase that sounds ordinary to white listeners may signal danger, opportunity, or shared understanding to black ones. This does not mean every song is a coded escape plan. History becomes silly when it tries to turn every lyric into a secret map. But it is equally foolish to imagine that oppressed people never used language creatively under surveillance. Double meanings are a natural skill in unequal societies. One remarkable thread of resistance lies in the protection of memory. Enslavers depend on rupture. They separate people, rename them, move them, and record them in ways that serve property. In response, black families and communities preserve names, kin ties, places, and stories through oral memory. This child belongs to that woman. That man was sold from a farm near the river. Your grandmother came from the coast. Your uncle had a scar on his hand and a way of laughing before he finished a sentence. These details may sound domestic, but they resist erasure directly. Memory says you came from somewhere and belonged to someone before the ledger claimed otherwise. Sabotage appears in subtle forms. A fence may be repaired slowly. A tool may dull unexpectedly. An animal may stray when watched by the wrong person. Cotton sacks may fill less efficiently than expected. In kitchens, a meal may be delayed by perfectly plausible misfortunes. These acts are hard to document with certainty because records come mostly from owners complaining about carelessness, slowness, insolence, or waste. But repeated complaints across regions suggest more than mere accident. Resistance often wears the mask of inconvenience. A quirky detail from some accounts involves the use of clothing and possessions in defiant ways. A cherished kerchief might be worn on a special day despite disapproval. A man might shape his hat or coat to express individuality beyond plantation issue. A woman might preserve beads, ribbons, or stitched patterns that carry personal meaning. These choices are not rebellion in the dramatic sense, yet they matter. Control over appearance can be one of the few available forms of self-assertion. Even under slavery, people refuse to become visually blank. Food can be political too. though very quietly, saving seed from a garden plot, fishing in a hidden place, keeping chickens if allowed, or sharing provisions outside an owner's supervision all reduce dependence a little. A person who knows where berries grow, where traps can be set, or how to make a ration stretch further has secured more than calories. They have made room for action. In hard systems, autonomy often begins in very practical corners. Religion nourishes resistance by preserving inward freedom. A prayer meeting may not call for insurrection, but it can strengthen courage, mutual trust, and a belief that earthly masters are not the final judges of human worth. The story of Moses does not need many explanatory notes to acquire force in a slave society. The language of deliverance travels well. So does the conviction that suffering has meaning beyond the uses imposed by power. Faith can make a person endure more, certainly, but it can also make domination seem less absolute. There are moments when resistance becomes more open. A person answers back, a group confronts an overseer, someone strikes in panic or fury. Someone destroys equipment in a way that leaves no doubt. Such moments often end in terrible punishment, which is why they are relatively rare. Yet they remind everyone that coercion has limits. No system of forced labour runs on fear alone. It also runs on the constant possibility that fear may fail. White society lives with this knowledge more than it likes to admit. Patrols, past systems, curfews, weapons, militias, and rumour all reveal a deep anxiety about black resistance. Enslavers talk confidently about loyalty and contentment, then sleep with loaded weapons nearby. They describe enslaved people as childlike, then build legal systems designed to monitor every gathering, movement, and exchange of information. Such behaviour tells you what they truly believe. They know the system is resented. They know people are thinking. They know ownership is never secure in the imagination of the owned. Free black people also resist. Though their methods often take more public and institutional form, they organise schools, churches, petitions, benevolent societies, and networks of information. They warn one another about kidnappers, assist fugitives when possible, challenge mistreatment, and insist on the dignity of black life in a nation that keeps denying it. A petition signed carefully in a meeting room may look tame beside a dramatic escape, but it too is a refusal. It says we are here, we can reason, we can organise, and we will not disappear on your preferred terms. Women's resistance deserves special notice because it is often less visible in older histories shaped by dramatic male narratives. Women protect children, preserve food, maintain kin ties, pass on stories, conceal plans, negotiate with owners, and create domestic spaces where psychological survival remains possible. A mother teaching a child a family name is resisting. A woman refusing to reveal another's whereabouts is resisting. A laundress overhearing information in a white household and passing it carefully onward is resisting. The domestic sphere is not passive ground. It is a living site of intelligence and defiance. Children resist too, though in forms adults may miss. They slip away to play when tasks are expected. They imitate owners in mocking ways out of earshot. They remember things they were not meant to hear. They learn roots, names, and habits. Childhood under slavery is constrained, but children are observant creatures. Their minds gather clues long before anyone trusts them with open plans. Sometimes a community survives because children know when to be silent. Some acts of resistance are purely internal, and that should not make them seem lesser. To refuse the master's account of who you are, to keep private judgments about white hypocrisy, to dream of another life, to laugh at power where power cannot hear, to remember a parent's voice exactly. These are not visible rebellions, yet they preserve the self from complete colonization. An enslaved person may be forced to labour, but inward agreement is another matter entirely. History often measures action better than the interior refusal, though the latter may be just as vital. Scholars differ on how to balance attention between everyday resistance and the overwhelming force of the slave system. Some warn that focusing too much on small acts can make slavery seem easier to bear than it was. Others argue that failing to notice such acts repeats the enslaver's fantasy of total domination. Both concerns matter. Resistance did not cancel suffering. It did not dissolve chains. But it did mean that enslaved people were never merely passive victims waiting for history to notice them. They interpreted, maneuvered, remembered, and acted with purpose inside terrible constraints. The emotional atmosphere of quiet resistance is often tense rather than triumphant. A secret lesson may happen with one ear turned toward the door. A hidden visit to family may end before dawn with tears and hurried steps. A runaway may be betrayed. A petition may be ignored. A joke whispered in the field may die instantly when an overseer approaches. Defiance under oppression is often exhausted, partial, and costly. That does not lessen its importance. It makes it more real. By night, the plantation, farm, or city quarter seems calmer from a distance, but inwardly it may be full of private motion. Someone is planning, someone is teaching, someone is memorizing a route, someone is hiding a paper, someone is deciding whether tomorrow is the day to risk everything. The air smells of smoke, damp ground, sweat dried into cloth, and the last traces of supper in that ordinary darkness. Resistance continues without spectacle. It lives in preparation, in caution, in courage measured by necessity rather than applause. So when you think about resistance in 1810, do not picture only the rare explosion. Picture the daily contest over time, language, memory, movement, and selfhood. Picture the stolen lesson, the guarded secret, the hidden garden, the slowed task, the night journey, the preserved name, the prayer that quietly refuses earthly hierarchy. Picture people who are denied power in law, but who still produce pressure against the system from within its smallest cracks. Slavery tries to own everything. Human beings keep proving that everything is more than ownership can hold. By 1810, the land itself seems to be shifting under American ambition. Roads push farther. Rivers carry more traffic. Surveyors, speculators, planters, and politicians all speak with bright confidence about new opportunities, fertile ground, and the future wealth of the Republic. But for Black Americans, especially those trapped in slavery, this expanding horizon does not look like possibility. It looks like forced movement. It looks like uprooted families, longer coffles, harsher frontiers, and a growing cotton economy that demands bodies with an appetite that seems almost mechanical. The nation calls it development. The people driven into it know another word. The cotton frontier is one of the great engines of this age, short staple cotton. Made widely profitable by the cotton gin in the years before 1810, spreads rapidly across inland areas of the South, where long staple cotton had not flourished. Fields open in Georgia, the Mississippi Territory, and lands beyond, often recently taken from native peoples through pressure, deceit, treaty, or outright violence. White planters look at these regions and see wealth waiting in the soil. Enslaved people look at the same expansion and see separation, overwork, disease, and uncertainty carried westward like a storm front. You can feel the frontier first through rumour. Someone hears that a master has bought land in the southwest. Someone else says a trader passed through asking prices for young men and women. An overseer mentions cottonseed. A wagon is repaired more carefully than usual. Horses are bought. A map appears in the big house. These signs matter. People living under slavery become skilled readers of practical clues because official announcements rarely arrive as kindness. The sail south may be spoken of only at the last moment, but often the household senses it coming through change behaviour, tightened accounting, and the strange alertness of the white men imagining profit. Cotton is labour-hungry in a specific and punishing way. Land must be cleared, often from thick forest or tangled growth. Trees are cut, roots burned or dug, stumps worked around, fences built, cabins thrown up, and fields broken open under fierce sun. Then come the endless agricultural motions of planting, hoeing, chopping and picking. Cotton farming can consume a season with repetition. The plants themselves are not dramatic. They sit there in rows, dry and ordinary looking, while human bodies do the drama for them. Fingers split on burrs, backs ache, sacks drag, dust settles into clothes. The field asks for the same movement again and again until the body begins to feel like part of the crop. The frontier is not only about new fields, it is about transportation of people. By 1810, the domestic slave trade is becoming more central to the American economy, especially as the transatlantic trade has been legally banned since 1808. That ban does not end slavery. It redirects pressure inward. Enslaved people are sold from older plantation regions and from the upper South into the expanding lower South and Southwest. Virginia, Maryland, and other areas increasingly become sources of forced migration. The road south and west becomes a line of grief. It is walked, ridden, chained, and remembered. A coffle is one of the bleakest sights of the period. Men, women, and sometimes children are marched in groups, often bound together, guarded, and pushed over long distances toward markets and plantations in newer cotton regions. The sensory world of such a journey is harsh and immediate. Dust sticks to sweaty skin, iron rubs raw at wrists or necks, shoes wear through, rain turns roads to sucking mud, sun beats on hats or bare heads. At night, sleep comes on unfamiliar ground under watch. The sound of chains, wagon wheels, low conversation, crying children, coughing, and tired animals can stay in the mind long after the road is gone from sight. Some enslaved people are moved not by traders but directly by owners relocating entire operations. A planter decides to seek larger profits and carries enslaved families, tools, seed, and livestock to new lands. This process can feel slightly less fragmented than sail through a trader, but only slightly. It still means leaving known ground, graves, kin networks, and familiar habits of survival. A person may remain with a spouse or children yet lose every wider connection that made life bearable. The road west strips away the geography of memory and replaces it with a raw landscape where nothing has yet been learned safely. The new settlements are often rough places. Cabins are temporary, fields are half cleared, water sources may be poor. Disease can spread easily in low, wet, mosquito-ridden areas. Food may be irregular at first because the work of establishing the plantation outruns the work of provisioning it properly. The smell of the place tells you its rawness: fresh-cut timber, damp earth, wood smoke, sweat, mule leather, and the green sharpness of recently broken plants. There is little softness in a new plantation district. Everything feels provisional except the demands. Historians still debate how quickly some frontier plantations stabilized into established regimes versus how long many remained improvisational and chaotic. In some districts, planters built substantial operations with startling speed. In others, debt, weather, mismanagement, and illness made early years unstable and brutal. What seems consistent is that enslaved people bore the cost of this uncertainty. If a planter overreached financially, the labour intensified. If crops failed, rations might shrink. If disease spread, the sick were often worked too long. Frontier risk belonged mainly to the enslaver on paper and to the enslaved in the flesh. The cotton boom also changes the emotional climate of slavery. In older tobacco regions, slavery is already cruel and deeply entrenched, but cotton introduces a sharper sense of acceleration. There is more land to seize, more speculation to chase, more young labourers to value, more pressure to produce at scale. Profit expectations rise. With them often comes closer supervision, harsher discipline, and increased willingness to sell people into distant markets. The slave system grows not only outward but more confident in its own economic importance. Wealth gives cruelty a polished voice. One strange detail from the period is how often frontier dreams were marketed in almost cheerful language. Letters, advertisements, and conversations among white planters could describe fertile acreage, healthy stock, and promising yields with a kind of salesman's optimism that sits uneasily beside the reality that all this promise depended on transporting human beings by force. The same man who admired a tract of land for its rich black soil might calmly discuss the number of enslaved workers needed to make it pay. It is one of history's colder habits to wrap violence in cheerful agricultural vocabulary. For black Americans already living in the Lower South, expansion means existing systems become denser and more connected to wider markets. Traders pass through more frequently. News of prices matters more. The presence of cotton reshapes work calendars and household fears. A family may be relatively settled one year and suddenly exposed to sale, or transfer the next because market conditions have changed. Cotton pulls distant places into one another's orbit. A decision in a counting house or port can end in a cabin hundreds of miles away. Native nations are part of this story too, because the cotton frontier expands onto indigenous lands under coercive conditions. Black Americans moved westward in slavery are being forced into territories already contested and inhabited. Sometimes they encounter native communities directly through labour, trade, rumour, or conflict. Sometimes they hear names of nations attached to the land underfoot. The frontier is not empty wilderness. It is a zone of dispossession layered upon dispossession. One people's republic of opportunity often arrives as another people's catastrophe. Women on the cotton frontier face heavy field labour alongside domestic burdens. They plant, hoe, and pick, then cook, mend, care for children, tend the sick, and improvise households in crude cabins with limited supplies. Pregnancy offers little protection from work, and childbirth in isolated settlements can be especially dangerous. Yet women also become central to stabilising these uprooted communities. They build cooking routines from scarce provisions, establish gardens where possible, preserve memory, and make rough spaces feel somewhat inhabitable. The frontier may flatter male planter ambition, but it often survives on women's endurance. Children absorb the move in complicated ways. Some are too young to grasp distances, but feel the loss of familiar faces and sleeping places. Older children remember roads, river crossings, strange accents, and the sight of dense woods giving way to clearings. On new plantations, children may be put to work early because labour demands are constant. Childhood narrows quickly when everything around you is in the business of becoming profitable. Still, children also adapt fast. They learn paths, climb stumps, notice wildlife, and begin mapping the new place with their bodies. Even under forced migration, human beings start making worlds, because they must. Resistance continues on the frontier, though conditions can make it harder. An unfamiliar landscape offers both danger and possibility. New roads may be confusing, but a rough settlement may also have weaker oversight at first. Some people run during transit, slipping away at river landings, market stops, or campsites. Others resist through slow work, sabotage, or by preserving kin ties in a place designed to dissolve them. Escape in a new district is risky because local networks are thin. Yet the instability of frontier life can create small openings. Oppression expands, but so does the geography of improvisation. The domestic slave trade gains an almost bureaucratic normality in this period. Traders evaluate teeth, muscles, age, and reproductive potential. Advertisements speak the language of health, skill, and value. Markets classify people with blunt efficiency. This is not incidental to national growth, it is central to it. Banks extend credit, land values rise, ports ship bales, insurers manage risk, merchants count returns, cotton moves outward, and money flows back inward. At the centre of that circulation stand enslaved black people, whose forced labour makes the whole thing function. The economy looks energetic from a distance. Up close, it sounds like orders, crying, and the scrape of hose. For free black Americans, the cotton frontier can heighten insecurity too. Expanding slave territories mean more regions where black freedom is doubted or constrained. A free person travelling southward or westward risks scrutiny, detention, or worse. News of slave sales, kidnappings, and new plantation districts sharpens awareness that the Republic is not slowly leaving slavery behind. It is reorganizing itself around it more powerfully than ever. That realization affects the mood of black communities far beyond the frontier itself. There is also a psychological dimension to forced migration that records only faintly. To be taken from known ground means more than geographic change. It means losing the tree line you recognized at dusk, the creek whose sound marked home, the graves you visited, the smell of one region's soil after rain, the exact route to a spouse's cabin, the church path, the market corner, the woods where one could pray privately. Place holds memory in the body. When the body is moved, memory has to travel without its usual anchors. That can feel disorienting in ways numbers and maps never show. Planters on the frontier often like to imagine themselves as builders of civilization. They speak of transforming wilderness, improving land, and extending productive order. Yet what they often build first is a landscape of extraction held together by compulsion. Cabins for the enslaved are rough, overseers are armed, fields are organized before comfort is established. The social order is improvised around profit targets rather than humane settlement. Civilization, in this version, seems to require an awful lot of whip cracks and unfinished roofs. The atmosphere of a frontier evening carries its own character. The day's heat lingers in the earth. Smoke from multiple fires settles low. Frogs and insects begin their noisy work near water. The smell of fresh timber mingles with sweat and ash. Somewhere an axe still strikes late. Somewhere a child cries from overtiredness. Somewhere adults speak quietly about who was sold, who arrived, who might run, and whether the new soil will at least grow enough food in the garden patch to make the season survivable. Newness, under slavery, is rarely exciting for the enslaved. It is merely untested hardship. By 1810, then, the expanding cotton frontier is not simply an agricultural development. It is a vast human redistribution powered by force, finance, and optimism of a particularly ruthless kind. It pushes black Americans into harsher labor regimes, stretches family ties across impossible distances, and transforms regional slavery into an even more aggressive national system. Land, cotton, and credit may dominate the talk of politicians and planters, but on the ground, the frontier is made of roads walked unwillingly, cabins raised without choice, and fields opened by people whose futures are being traded alongside the crop itself. Night in 1810 does not always bring peace, but it does bring a different kind of truth. The workday is over, the road is quieting, the fires are burning lower, and the Republic's loud daytime claims about liberty, enterprise, and progress begin to sound a little thinner in the dark. For black Americans, whether enslaved or free, the evening gathers the emotional weight of everything the day has tried to scatter: labor, fear, tenderness, prayer, memory, hunger, duty, and hope, all settle into the same dim air. What remains, once the noise of command fades, is the real measure of a life. You feel night first through temperature. The heat lifts a little from the earth. A breeze, if one arrives, touches sweat dried stiff in cloth and makes the skin aware of itself again. In cabins, rooms, lofts, kitchens, and rented chambers, bodies shift toward whatever comfort can be made. A blanket is pulled up, a fire is stirred, shoes are set aside, a child is moved from one lap to another without fully waking. The smell of wood smoke deepens. So does the smell of people living close together, tired enough to stop pretending fatigue is temporary if you are enslaved. The night can be the only part of the day that feels partly your own, though even that is uncertain. There are still chores to finish, clothes to mend, food to prepare for tomorrow. children to settle, a neighbour to check on, a bruise to wash, a kettle to clean. In some places there may be spinning, sewing, or extra work demanded after dark. Time under slavery has a remarkable ability to keep charging rent after sunset. Even rest must often be carved out of necessity rather than granted as a human right. Yet the evening remains precious because it holds what daylight often crowds out. People talk differently at night, voices soften, truth moves a little more freely. A man may say what he could not safely say in the field. A woman may share a fear she hid all day. An elder may tell a child a story that carries warning, humour, and memory in equal measure. Firelight changes faces. It blurs harshness and draws attention to eyes, hands, and the tilt of a head while listening. The room becomes less about labouring bodies and more about persons. The uncertainty of the future hangs over everything. In 1810, a black person in America cannot assume the social order will improve quickly. In many places it is becoming harsher, richer, and more territorially ambitious. The slave system is not retreating, it is expanding. Free black people are building institutions and communities. Yes, but they're doing so in a nation that keeps inventing new ways to narrow the meaning of their freedom. Enslaved people resist in quiet and open ways, but resistance does not guarantee relief. The future feels unstable because it is unstable. And still, people imagine it. This may be one of the most important facts about the time. They imagine children grown safely. They imagine a husband returning from hire. They imagine money saved. They imagine a church strengthened. They imagine literacy. They imagine reunion. They imagine, for the enslaved most daringly of all, a condition beyond slavery, even if they cannot always name how it will come. Hope is not always bright and poetic. Sometimes it is almost plain. Let the child live. Let the winter be mild. Let there be no sale this month. Let wages be paid honestly. Let tomorrow pass without disaster. Even modest hopes can keep a life from collapsing inward. In many households, storytelling rises with the dark. A tale told to children may involve a clever animal, a foolish proud man, a spirit warning, or a figure who wins not by force but by wit. Such stories entertain, certainly, but they also teach. They train the mind to notice that power can be tricked, that greed can be mocked, that the weak are not always helpless, and that survival often belongs to the alert rather than the mighty. Historians still argue over how directly African folktale traditions can be traced in specific early American versions, but the family resemblance in style, trickster logic, and communal telling is often striking. You hear these stories in the way people settle around them. A child leans forward on a pallet. Someone near the hearth chuckles before the punchline arrives because they already know it. An older listener interrupts to improve a detail. A younger one asks whether the fox was really so foolish or the rabbit truly so clever. Storytelling is not passive. It is shared social work. In a harsh world, a tale that lets listeners laugh at arrogance is doing more than passing time. Night is also when the body reports the truth of the day. Muscles stiffen as they cool. Hands throb once they stop moving. A cut noticed vaguely at noon becomes sharp in the wash basin. Feet release heat and ache inside or outside worn shoes. The touch of water on cracked skin can sting fiercely. So can the first stretch of a back unbent after hours of labour. The body keeps its own ledger, and it writes in soreness rather than ink. For women, the close of day often carries a second shift of care. Children must be fed or quieted. Garments must be checked. Hair may be braided, wrapped, or combed. Food may be saved, stretched, or hidden. A sick relative may need tending. A baby may nurse through half the night while tomorrow's work still waits at dawn. Under slavery, white observers often praised black women for strength, as if it were a charming racial ornament. Strength was not a decorative trait. It was a burden forced into necessity, used daily because society withheld gentler arrangements. Men, too, carry silent weight after dark. Some worry over wives and children not under the same roof. Some count the odds of a possible escape and then put the thought away because the risk to others is too great. Some rehearse the humble language required for the next day's dangerous encounters with white authority. Some wonder whether their sons can be taught dignity without also teaching them the pain that will likely greet it. Masculinity under slavery and racial exclusion is complicated by powerlessness in law and responsibility in love. The struggle is not whether to care, but how to care effectively with so little control. For free black households, the evening may include different calculations. Rent due, apprenticeship hopes for a son, schooling for a daughter, papers to keep dry and safe, a church collection to contribute despite thin means. News of a kidnapping, or a new law discussed in low worried tones. Freedom allows planning, but planning does not remove danger. It simply lets danger be met with more deliberate tools. A curious detail from the period is the emotional importance of seemingly modest possessions at night. A Bible on a shelf, a folded paper proving free status, a kerchief saved from a mother, a carved spoon, a cup repaired twice, a little box under a bed. Such objects gather significance in darkness because darkness invites thought, and thought reaches for anchors. A possession may be cheap in money yet rich in assurance. It says this is mine, or this was hers, or this proves who I am, or this remains when other things have not. The sounds of the night differ sharply by place. On a plantation, you may hear frogs in wet ground, insects in the grass, distant animal calls, and the crackle of hearth coals settling inward. In a port city, the harbour never fully sleeps. Ropes knock against masts, wheels clatter late. Drunken voices drift from a tavern. Somewhere a fiddle plays. Somewhere a constable's step changes the mood of a street. In a small town, a dog may bark at almost nothing for several persistent minutes, as if auditioning for the role of unnecessary alarm. Every environment has its own darkness, and black Americans learn to read those differences closely. Dreams themselves become a kind of territory. People dream of lost relatives, of old roads, of markets, of sermons, of fields, of ships, of impossible freedom, of danger repeating, of children safe and laughing, of water, of home. Sleep does not always heal. For many, it remains uneasy, punctured by fear, noise, memories, and the knowledge that dawn will come too soon. Yet sleep also offers temporary release from the gaze of power. No overseer enters the dream with full authority. No ledger controls what the mind assembles from longing and grief. There is scholarly debate over how much enslaved and free black people in this period thought. In explicitly national political terms versus family, church, and local community terms. The truth is likely mixed and dependent on circumstance. Some did engage the language of rights, citizenship, and republican hypocrisy with sophistication. Others focused more immediately on kin, faith, and survival. The categories should not be forced too sharply apart. The personal was political long before modern slogans learned to say so neatly. To protect a child, preserve a marriage, found a church, or teach a letter in 1810 was also to confront the structure of the nation at night. The contradictions of that nation grow impossible to miss. White Americans celebrate independence while policing black movement. They praise family while profiting from family separation. They speak of Christian virtue while ignoring the cruelty around them or arranging it themselves. They admire enterprise while building fortunes on stolen labour. These contradictions do not simply exist in speeches and newspapers. They settle into the ground of daily life. Black Americans do not need philosophy lectures to understand hypocrisy. They hear it in tone, see it in law, and feel it in the distance between national ideals and personal treatment. And yet despair is not the only possible response. There is endurance, which is not the same as cheerful acceptance. There is patience, which is not passivity. There is humour, which sometimes flickers up at the very edge of pain. There is style, memory, prayer, gossip, song, and the affectionate correction of children. There is the discipline of folding tomorrow's clothes, even if tomorrow is uncertain. There is the decision to save seed, to keep a family name alive, to clean a floor, to recite a verse, to mend a sleeve carefully, to speak kindly when the day has not been kind. Civilization, if the word deserves anything noble, lives there more surely than in the counting house. The social future of Black America in 1810 remains unwritten in any secure sense. The next decades will bring intensification, conflict, movement, institution building, terror, argument, and struggle on a scale few individuals can fully predict from the quiet of one evening. But individuals do not need a map of the century to know what matters tonight. Food enough, safety enough, company enough, a word of comfort, a place to lie down, a reason not to surrender the self. History often moves through such humble requirements before it appears grand enough for textbooks. Children finally drift off, adults speak less. The fire sinks lower. Someone checks the door or simply glances toward it out of habit. Outside, the sky opens wide over fields, riverbanks, roofs, lanes, marshes, and city masts. Stars look indifferent, though people looking at them may find comfort anyway. The smell of cooling ash replaces the sharper scent of active flame. Cloth settles, breath evens out. The room becomes a chamber of waiting, not only for morning, but for whatever form of mercy life may still yield. And perhaps that is what the uncertain future feels like most honestly in 1810. Not certainty of deliverance, not confidence in national justice, but a hard, steady refusal to let oppression define the whole horizon. Black Americans at this moment live under extraordinary pressure, yet they continue to make meaning, raise children, build churches, preserve memory, pursue wages, resist humiliation, and imagine life beyond the terms imposed on them. The future is dark in the sense that it cannot be seen clearly. It is not dark because there is nothing there. Now the room quiets further. You can hear only a few remaining sounds. A coal shifting, a sleeper turning, wind touching the wall. Far away, perhaps, a wagon still moving on some late road. Human life in 1810 is fragile, but it is not empty. Under slavery, under prejudice, under threat, Black Americans carry forward an interior world richer than the age deserves. The night does not solve anything. It simply gathers the truth gently into one place. People have been used, watched, priced, doubted, burdened, and denied. They have also loved, believed, laughed, remembered, taught, and endured. In that fact lies the quiet dignity of the hour. Let the darkness soften now. Let the fields blur into shadow and the harbour lights fade one by one. Let the roads disappear into the trees and the rooftops lose their edges against the sky. Think of the warmth left in the hearthstones, the rough blanket settling over tired legs, the last murmur of a prayer too soft to catch in full. Think of hands finally unclenched, of breathing slowed by exhaustion, of a child asleep without questions for a little while. The republic outside remains restless, ambitious, and deeply unjust. But in these last moments of the day, inside cabins and rented rooms and narrow beds under low ceilings, human beings remain more than the system surrounding them. They are not statistics, not cargo, not labour units, not legal categories. They are souls in the dark, carrying hurt and hope together, so the night holds them, imperfectly but gently, and the quiet deepens around their breathing until even fear loosens its grip for a while. The fires go dim, the stars turn overhead. The long uncertain future waits beyond sleep, but sleep arrives first, soft as smoke, and kind enough for now.